I'm no athlete, but running at night was my way of clearing my head. I live in a more remote neighborhood of Seattle, where houses are far apart and the streets are lined with tall trees. Beautiful during the day, mysterious at night, but I always found it peaceful. And the rush of work only left me that time to exercise, so I got used to it. I used to head out around 10 p.m. I'd put on my headphones, play a chill playlist, and run along a 2-lane road that cuts through the forest and loops around the neighborhood. I've been running there for months. Always the same route, always alone, and I never had any problems. But that week, something changed. The first time I felt it was subtle. A colder night, fog slowly settling in, and that different kind of silence. Like the world had turned off its sound. I was at the most isolated part of the road, where the forest closes in almost claustrophobically. Suddenly, I had a clear feeling that someone was there with me. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but I felt it. That tightness in your chest you get when you know you're being watched. On the way home, I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong on that road. 2 days later, I went back to running at the same time. I don't like changing my routine, honestly. I think changing my route would just make me even more anxious. So I took the same path, the same road through the woods. But that night, something was different. About 15 minutes after I started running, I noticed a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the echo of my own footsteps. The asphalt there has a weird kind of resonance depending on the humidity. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized something was off. The footsteps were way too synchronized. If I picked up my pace, the sound behind me picked up too. If I slowed down, the same. It was like someone was perfectly mimicking my every move. Yet I couldn't see anyone. No shadows, no figures, nothing. It sounded like the footsteps were coming from inside the forest, but it was impossible to tell for sure. The sound echoed, and I started getting paranoid. I took off my headphones to hear better. Stopped, looked back, complete silence. Just the fog covering the ground and the sound of my own breathing. When I started running again, the footsteps came back. That's when the real fear set in. It wasn't just discomfort anymore. It was terror disguised as doubt. Because no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I knew it wasn't just in my head. Someone or something was running with me. The next night, I almost gave up on running. I sat in the living room for about 20 minutes, staring at the front door, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just exhaustion. Come on, an adult afraid of the dark? But in the end, I put on my sweatshirt, laced up my sneakers, and went out. This time, I didn't bring my headphones. I wanted to hear everything. I needed to be sure. I ran the same route. The fog was thicker than ever, and the air felt heavier, like something was pushing me back toward home. When I reached the stretch where the footsteps had started the night before, I stopped running, leaned against a tree, stood there in total silence. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, on the asphalt, right beside me. But I wasn't moving. They were quick, short, like someone was trotting around me, circling slowly. I couldn't see anything. Just that dry, firm sound, like saws hitting damp asphalt. I hid behind the tree and peeked. Nothing, not a soul, just the forest. But then I felt it. A presence, that feeling that freezes everything inside you. The kind of fear that doesn't scream, it whispers. The air grew colder. My hair stood on end, and before I could even think, I took off running. I ran like my life depended on it. Because at that moment, I was sure it did. After that night, I swore to myself I would stop. No more running, no more trails, enough, but it didn't help. Even without leaving the house, I kept hearing the footsteps. Not all the time, just every now and then. Always in the middle of the night. It would start with a distant sound, almost imperceptible. And then it would get closer, like someone was running down the street, then on the sidewalk. until it sounded like they were right next to my window. The first time it happened, I froze. I didn't even check. I just stood there in the dark, holding my breath. I told 2 friends about it. One laughed, the other said it was just in my head. But I know what I heard. And worse, I know what I felt. A month later, I moved away. New city, new routine. And for a while, it worked. Silence, peace. I started to think I had gotten over it. I even went back to running during the day in crowded places. Until one random morning, while I was warming up before heading out, I heard footsteps in the hallway of my new apartment. Footsteps that matched mine exactly. I walked around the building, checked with the manager, even looked at the security cameras. Nothing. No neighbor had passed by at that time. That's when I realized I hadn't left anything behind. Whatever it was, it came with me. Now I only run surrounded by people, in busy parks. Never alone again. Running, for me, was more therapy than sport. After an entire day stuck in the office, I needed a way to clear my head. The urban trail near my house in Denver was perfect for that. Well maintained, with streetlights along most of the path and always bustling during the day. At night, it was different, empty and silent, yet it still gave me a strange feeling. The route was simple, a big loop around the park, crossing small patches of woods. Most of the time, I didn't even need a flashlight. I just followed the yellowish glow of the streetlights. Some areas got darker, especially where the vegetation grew denser and the trees formed natural tunnels. But even those stretches had never truly scared me. At least not until now. Over time, I started noticing the trail seemed different. Nothing too obvious. Just small details, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. Burned out streetlights. Sections where mud covered part of the path, as if something or someone had passed through carelessly. I just thought it was poor maintenance, nothing more. But every time I went through the darker parts, I felt that knot in my stomach. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. One of those nights, right after a light rain, I decided to run anyway. The trail was wet, and every step sank a little into the soft mud that covered some stretches. That's when I noticed. At first, I thought they were just the usual marks from other runners, but looking closer, I saw the footprints were weird. They were way too deep, like the person was either very heavy or moving in a strange, dragging way. And they were scattered erratically, not following the trail but veering off into the woods and back, like whoever had been there was lost or searching for something. I kept running, but that feeling clung to my skin. In some spots, I could hear faint snapping sounds from the woods, like branches breaking lightly. Every time I slowed down to listen better, the sound disappeared. That night, I finished my run early, without looking back. The next day at work, I casually mentioned it to 2 colleagues who also ran in the area. One of them immediately got serious and said he'd heard rumors about people disappearing on the city's trails. Nothing official, nothing that made it to the news. People who went out for a run and never came back. Phones found lying on the ground, sneakers abandoned in bushes. It shook me. Even so, I kept running. Out of stubbornness, because part of me didn't want to believe something bad could happen to me. Those things were for other people, in other cities, not here. Not to me. One Friday night, I went out a little later than usual. The trail was more deserted than ever. The air had that heavy, cold smell of wet earth, and the fog was starting to spread like low smoke. I quickly noticed the trail felt different. The streetlights that usually guided me flickered, some completely out. In some areas, the mud seemed to have swallowed the markings on the ground. Instead of a clear path, I saw strange forks that, I swear, had never been there before. I kept moving, trying to orient myself by the distant city lights, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Every step echoed too loudly. Every shadow seemed to shift at the corner of my eye. That's when I realized I didn't know where I was anymore. The trees had closed in tighter, like they were leaning over me. The trail I knew by heart now seemed scrambled. And then I heard footsteps. Not echoing, but real. Loud, firm, right behind me. I looked back, my heart hammering in my chest. But the footsteps kept going, closer, stronger. There, in the middle of the fog, I understood. I wasn't the one deciding where I was going anymore. Something else was. Without thinking, I started running, not for training, not to beat my time. I ran like someone running to survive. The uneven ground of the new trail made my feet slip, and the mud seemed to pull my sneakers down, like it was trying to trap me there. With every wrong turn, every tree that suddenly appeared in my way, my desperation grew. Amid the madness, I started seeing things on the ground. Old sneakers, tossed to the side, still tied. A torn t-shirt caught on a branch, a mud-stained cap. Things that looked like they'd been left behind in a hurry. Like whoever had been there before tried to run, but hadn't made it. My breath was already failing when I finally saw a light, weak, flickering, but real. It was the light from a street lamp at the edge of the original trail, near the main road. I pushed my body to the limit, stumbling through the mud, ignoring the pain in my legs. When I reached the asphalt, I stopped. My hands were trembling, and sweat mixed with the cold night air. I looked back, expecting to see some explanation. An animal, a person. But all I saw was a figure standing at the entrance of the trail. A dark silhouette, motionless, as if watching me. I stood there, staring at that shadow for what felt like an eternity, until the figure took a step into the forest and disappeared. I never went back to that trail. And to this day, every time I drive past it, I feel like something is still watching me. When I signed up for my first endurance race, I knew I had to take training seriously. With the late summer heat in Richmond, running during the day was impractical. The asphalt sizzled and the air felt solid. So I adjusted my routine. I ran at night after 10 p.m. when the city finally seemed to breathe. The neighborhood where I live had always made me feel safe. Wide streets, well-kept parks, and that small-town vibe where everyone pretends to know everyone. My runs followed a set route from my house, through 2 parks connected by a semi-urban trail, then back along the main avenues. It was my favorite moment of the day. Running at night had a strange charm. The city would empty out, the streetlights created golden islands in the darkness, and the silence was almost comforting. That week, something changed. First, it was the streetlights. Some had burned out, leaving pockets of darkness along the way. Then came that feeling, hard to explain, as if I wasn't alone. As if someone was in the dark, just a few meters away, watching my every move. After all, who really pays attention to a guy running late at night? That night, I should have paid attention to my surroundings. They say survival instinct is something you ignore until you need it. And that night, it screamed inside me. I started the run as usual, warming up along the first few lit blocks. Everything seemed normal, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps, controlled breathing, the warm night air hitting my face. But after the second park, about halfway through the route, I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. It was subtle. A shadow crossing the sidewalk about 20 meters ahead. Too quick to be just my imagination, but slow enough to leave me doubting. Still, I kept running. Then the sound started. Footsteps, light ones, trying to blend with mine. When I sped up, it felt like something behind me sped up too. When I slowed down, it slowed down with me. I turned to look several times and saw nothing. Empty streets, dark houses, a few flickering streetlights in the middle of the avenue. But the feeling kept growing. That instinctive certainty that I was being followed. That someone or something was on my trail, waiting for me to make a wrong move. To make it worse, I started noticing that in the sections where the trail entered the woods, The streetlights were all out. Corridors of darkness ready to swallow me. With every street I crossed, every shadow that moved without reason, fear clung tighter to my throat. I was already nervous, glancing back at every corner, when I entered the most isolated part of the route, a section with no lighting, where the trail crossed through the park before returning to the avenue. On my first step into that darkness, I felt it. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. I felt it. Something moving. It was quick. A change in the air, a heavy presence appearing out of nowhere. I spun around instinctively, my eyes searching for any sign of life, and I found it. At the edge of the trail, among the trees, a dark figure. Black clothes, hood pulled down covering the face. Standing still, just staring at me. For a second, I froze. My brain trying to decide whether it was real or just adrenaline playing tricks. I didn't have time to think much. The figure took a step forward, then another, and then it ran. It ran toward me, fast, determined, no hesitation. That's when instinct screamed louder than fear. I ran like I had never run before. Every heartbeat felt like an explosion in my ears. Every breath was a stab in my lungs. I knew that if I stumbled, if I took the wrong turn, if I hesitated, it would end there. I thought about screaming, but I had no strength. All I could do was run, guided by the faint lights of the city ahead, praying to find someone, anyone. The sound of my footsteps was drowned out by the heavy, fast breathing behind me. He was close. Very close. When I spotted the main road ahead, it felt like my body found a final burst of energy. It was my only chance. I sprinted as fast as I could, almost tripping over my own feet, feeling my legs burn with every step. The moment I stepped onto the asphalt of the avenue, the difference was immediate. Cars passing, bright lights, movement, life. I ran straight into the first open store I saw, a 24-hour convenience store, and entered without looking back. The clerk, a bored-looking kid scrolling on his phone, lifted his eyes in surprise when he saw me burst in. I could barely breathe, trying to hide the panic on my face. I hid between the beverage shelves, waiting for the adrenaline to fade. That's when I saw it through the store's window. Across the street, standing under a tree, was him, motionless, hood still covering his face, posture still tense. He stared at me like he was just waiting. He didn't move, didn't run, didn't signal. He just stayed there for long seconds. And then, without any rush, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I didn't leave the store until the sun started rising. And even today, even on busy streets, even surrounded by people, I still look over my shoulder sometimes. Because there are some things you escape. But fear runs with you forever.